look at the temperature variation, we see that the variation is no more than +1, -1 degree. And that enable human societies to start to develop and thrive through converting the biosphere partly into agricultural systems. And if we look at this part of the curve, we now see an even more unprecedented stability of the temperature. So this is sometimes referred to as the corridor of life, okay? And this is the only condition that we are actually aware of being able to sustain human societies as we have come to know them. But if we look at the very end of this graph, now we're here. We're at +1.2 degrees above pre-industrial temperature. So we're basically starting to exit this corridor of life, which will have big implications for humanity. But it's not only about temperature. It's not only about climate. So we cannot stare blindly only at that variable. So this is a slide that is just basically just a cherry picking of shocks that we see today. So I would argue that we have now a new perturbation landscape. We're living in this new perturbation landscape with new shocks. Not necessarily new, but they are at a magnitude and a frequency that we haven't seen before. And of course, these pulse events, these shocks, they interact with gradual change or creeping change, if you like. So we have climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, inequality, social trust, technology, and organized crime. We could add more to this, but this is basically just to highlight some of the slow growing changes that we see that will actually interact with this new shock landscape that we have. So luckily, we have a concept or a framework or perhaps even a science that we refer to as resilience. And resilience is explicitly addressing some of these issues. So it's explicitly incorporating turbulence into its definition and dynamics, incorporating uncertainty, so where are tipping points, and how do we foresee dynamics in the future, and complexity, of course, temporal scales, spatial scales, and so forth. So one could say that resilience science is basically about sustaining what we want to be there, what we want to persist. What state should a system be in? And of course, this is contested to some extent because it depends on who's defining the system, what is desirable and what is not desirable. But I leave that for a broader discussion. But it's about maintaining and building resilience of what we have. But importantly, resilience is not always good, right? You can have an undesirable system state, so a dictatorship or a very resilient, degraded ecosystem state. And in that case, you want to break resilience, right? You want to get rid of that stability. And building the capacity also for adapt and transform into something better. So resilience is not only about bouncing back, okay? It's also about sometimes breaking to find something new, to transform into something better. But what happens if resilience fails? Well, so this is just a blunt way to try to illustrate what we refer to as the resilience corridor. So basically what this figure is illustrating are two variables, the green line and the orange line. So the green line can be frequency of drought, say, and the orange one can be flood events. So what we see here is that the magnitude and frequency of these events are increasing over time. And there's scientific evidence of this. And some of these shocks will override the capacity of societies to cope with them. So they turn into crisis, right? So as the magnitude and frequency of these events increase, you will start to see more crisis in the system. But that is working in parallel with losing resilience. So we start to see a contraction of this resilience corridor due to the creeping changes that I described previously. So that means that shocks that could previously be absorbed by the system, by its resilience, are now becoming shocks that turn into crisis. And these are just two variables. We could add a multitude of variables, like the shock diagram that I showed you before. So this might eventually lead to a situation referred to as polycrisis. That basically means that crises start to reinforce and interact with each other. Okay? So loss of biodiversity leading to increased impact when there's drought could lead to increased food insecurity. That could lead to social conflicts, forced migration, and geopolitical tensions. So you see the cascading effect of these events. So they actually interact with each other. And this is something that you're all, many of you at least, are very familiar with. So we have this system of a global supply chain. This is just a supply chain for grains, passing different choke points, maritime choke points in the world. And there are three categories of choke points. So there are a couple of them that are critical. There's no other way around them. So the Turkish Strait and Strait of Hormuz, as we are very much aware of. And then there are others that are of high criticality and moderate criticality. And of course, what is interesting in this sort of shock cascading dynamic is the case when the ever-giving 400-meter container ship grounded in the Suez Canal. And that had repercussions 2 to 3 years after the actual event. So that illustrates a weakness in a very optimized system. So how can we build resilience then? I would argue, from my perspective, you can do it in many different ways. And I encourage you to actually read through the Resilience Science Must-Knows, that report. But for time reasons, I will stress one critical component, and that is diversity. Diversity, diversity, diversity. And that can be diversity of species or genes within species, different types of practices, assets, trading partners, and as I showed you before, alternative, a multitude of transportation routes. So diversity is important for systems to persist because it provides a portfolio of responses that can be summoned upon when needed. And we sometimes refer to that as response diversity. But there's also, of course, complementarity in this diversity. Many of you would probably call it redundancy. But, as I said before, of critical importance is that diversity provides the raw material for innovation and novelty and capacity for transformation, right? So keep that, that's a take-home message. Maintain or increase diversity. Just a couple of words about caution. So one is the scale paradox, right? You may increase diversity at a local scale, but by doing that, if you copy that strategy, you may increase homogeneity at a global scale. So one example here is from before the financial crisis, for instance, when banks started to use a similar risk management strategy. It turned out that many of the banks used the same strategy, so that cultivated homogeneity within the sector at a global scale. But it was a strategic decision among banks to diversify, right, at a local scale. And the same is true for food. We see increased, and you see that when you go to supermarket, that the diversity of items that you can buy has increased exponentially. But at a global scale, we see a homogeneity and basically a reduction of diversity. So that's a scale paradox. Keep that in mind when you do analysis of resilience, or when you think about resilience. The second one, and the final one, is about displacement. So when you build resilience at a local scale, you cannot do that if it is at expense of resilience loss somewhere else. That is fundamentally important. So that's why I think it's correct that resilience is a systemic way of looking at things, right? You have to be able to move across scale in a fairly comfortable way. So for instance, if you stop deforestation in one country, but you start to import forest products from another, that's a displacement effect. And it goes for pollution as well. And of course, also trade with virtual trade. So, resources that are embedded in certain commodities, such as water, for instance. And also, think about that you can actually have a state that is in a forced state. So you have a system that will require more and more and more input in order to maintain as it is. So it's an artificial system state. So as it doesn't build on the dynamics that are necessary to keep the system in its place. It's totally dependent on what you put into the system from a human perspective. And that's pretty much it. Thank you. 10 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Magnus. He's around, so grab him if you want to talk more. Very insightful breakdown. I have so many comments, but I'm not going to go there because we now have a panel. So without any more waiting, I want to invite Elizabeth Meager, Deputy Editor, Sustainable Views, Financial Times, who will guide us through this very exciting conversation. Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to everyone so far. It's great to be here. I would like to invite the panelists to the stage as well, please. Yeah. Yeah. Great, so you're very far away from me now. And I also, just to say, I am painfully English, and so I'm going to do my best with names, but there's lots of different names here. So I would like to introduce, on the far audience's far right, we have Francis West, Director of Social Sustainability at Tetra Pak. We have Marissa Drew, Chief Sustainability Officer at Standard Chartered Bank. I'm over here. And then we have Marlin Petterson-Beckman, Global Head of Sustainability Partnerships at Inter-IKEA Group, and Natalie Auguier, Chief Sustainability Officer at Danone. We have a super action-packed agenda today. There's lots of different moving parts, so no waffling to our panel. And if I cut you off, I apologise in advance. Before we start, I just wanted to say, so this is the third event for me of this year's London Climate Week. I know that the Resilience Hub didn't start this year, but I must say, I feel like everyone at Climate Week has kind of jumped on your thing a little bit, because all I've heard about so far is resilience. So you're definitely on, everyone here is on the right page. So we already know, kind of as we've heard, what's changing. The weather is changing significantly. Physical risks are increasing. Huge amount of disruption. I think it's meant to be 36 degrees tomorrow, and I don't know if anyone else was woken by the storm last night, but it was quite something. What decisions are changing? Businesses are adapting. I think particularly the businesses represented by the panel here, I hear an awful lot about kind of what they are doing, what lots of other businesses are doing as well. We also know that it's not enough. And we also know that lots of things aren't changing fast enough. And so policy is a big one. I write a lot about, I mean, for years I've written a lot about new policies, and now I'm kind of writing about the rollback of those policies. which is not great, and there is a huge kind of risk of a disorderly transition. So we have lots to get through. Before we kick off the panel discussion, we are going to do a quick pitching exercise. So hopefully all the speakers have prepared their very short pitches. I do have a timer. You have 2 minutes each, just to make sure we can get it. And so the idea here is that you, as the audience, are from the early 2000s. We've got a time machine, and each of our speakers is going to tell you what you need to know about resilience, specifically climate resilience, and the benefits of kind of getting ahead of it now. So I'm going to start with Natalie, and I'm going to start your timer. I will not start your timer.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you. So at Danone, we are in the food industry, as you know. So with yogurts, with water, with infant product, and also medical nutrition, very advanced. And we are operating in 55 different countries with actual operations and serving more than 120 countries. So we are a global company, but we think that we can combine responsibility and performance. And there is one quote which I want to to use, which is resilience doesn't stop at the factory gate. In fact, in 1972, one of our funder, Antoine Riboud, said, so 72, can you imagine? Responsibility doesn't stop at gate factory, exactly that. What a visionary. And we are building on his shoulder, honestly, continuing to nourish this idea that we need to be, yes, indeed, responsible for the entire impact we have. So which, of course, now resonate in a very new way. So it's about the climate change, and it's also about the community resilience also. And what we believe is that not only for our sites, we have more than 1,600 different sites all across the world, but also about the supply chain, which is even more, like 60,000 farmers who are serving our supply chain. And we are willing really to embrace this complexity with responsibility, understanding that this is about the resilience of the community, certainly, but honestly, it's also about the resilience of our own business. So this is how we see it, and I hope I can detail that later on.
Perfect. That is time. That was amazing. Were you timing it as well? Great. Okay, Malin, you're up next.
I'll speak faster then, so I can say more. Well, for IKEA, I would say business resilience is really about securing the systems that our business depend on. So building stable supply chains, securing access to renewable and recycled material and renewable energy, and at the same time, of course, ensuring good working conditions. And I would say that one of our strengths is that sustainability, long before the term even was invented, is an integrated part of our business. And it's really much seen as a resilience agenda today. Ingvar Kamprad, our founder, just like you mentioned, said already when IKEA was founded over 80 years ago that we have to be careful with resources and avoid waste. And today, of course, operating in more than 60 markets, climate-related risks show up in different ways in different locations, and in some ways it's becoming very operational, so impacting operations and infrastructure, and most importantly, people. So while, for example, building green infrastructure is important, it's more important also to really consider what has been said today. How do these learnings change how we assess risk, how we plan sites, how we engage with communities and make different investment decisions? And of course, raw materials, wood and cotton are our biggest materials. are also highly exposed to climate impacts. And here we are adopting our forest management practices. We have a pilot in Latvia together with the European Forest Institute to explore closer to nature forestry and see what we can learn to scale up these practices. And for cotton, we're working with WWF, for example. We have been part of training more than 400,000 farmers in Pakistan and India in more climate resilience agricultural practices on water and soil health and so on. And I would say maybe if looking back 10 years also that stress even more important that it starts with circular design. So we need to build it in from the beginning. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Marissa, over to you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Delighted to be here. Speaking of resilience, this is my third event already this morning, not just in Climate Week. So there's resilience for you. We are a global bank, globally systemic bank that operates in 52 footprint markets, very, very focused on the global south, the developing world, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And there is nowhere more on the front lines of the effects of the climate equation than in our markets. The homework assignment was in the early 2000s, what didn't you do that you would do today, I think. And back then, we had banks for time immemorial have had very defined risk types: market risk, credit risk, political risk, currency risk. But what was the one risk that did not appear anywhere in the 2000s? Climate risk, exposure to climate effects. And I have to say, very big, bold thinking, and I'll give all due credit to the now Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, when he put on the table the idea that climate risk was systemic risk. As the governor of the Bank of our very England, he was challenged big time, particularly in the media community, saying, well, who is this guy banging on about, isn't he supposed to be worrying about financial stability? He said, financial stability, systemic risk is associated with climate, and if we don't tackle this, if we don't create resilience, if we don't adapt, then we all are going to have a very serious problem in financial markets, and obviously from an asset valuation point of view. So at Standard Chartered, we have gone so far and we believe so deeply that this topic needs to be understood and embraced in financial terms, and we need private capital to invest in this space, that in my organizational structure, I created an innovation hub that is entitled Adaptation and Resilience Innovation Hub, where the day job of my team in that hub is to think about novel ways to pilot financial structures that can invest in adaptation and resilience and make a return case, an investable case, which 2 years ago, if I talked to the private sector about this topic, got a very blank stare. It was a government's problem, not a bank's problem. So that's
Thank you so much. Amazing. Okay, Francis, over to you.
Thanks very much. So for those of you back in the year 2000, Tetra Pak actually continues to do what we did then, which is to make food safe and available everywhere. But achieving that is getting more difficult, in part because of the impacts of climate and nature and socioeconomic inequality that we've seen over the last decades. So look, to better prepare ourselves, last year we undertook a climate and nature impact risk and opportunity analysis, and we used kind of forward-looking scenario-based assessments to identify what were the key IROs across our business and value chain. Now, the prioritized risks really mainly stem from our upstream value chain, so disruption of supply chains due to extreme weather events, collapse of renewable materials due to heat and pests, but also kind of transition risks like regulation on forestry and land use. Downstream, so our key products are food and beverage cartons made from mostly paperboard, and they're filled with dairy and juice, right? So our customers' value chains also kind of are highly kind of dependent on agriculture that again can be disrupted by weather events, heat, loss of biodiversity, pests, etc. So what we're doing with that analysis is now kind of developing actions mainly within our supply chain to increase resilience. What we should also be doing more of is, and we are starting to now, is integrating the consideration of impacts on people as another dimension of resilience, as Kitty was mentioning in her opening. So that should go for the physical effects of climate change. So making sure that workers in supply chains are not affected by heat stress, which also have knock-on effects on productivity. It goes for our work improving farmer productivity, so ensuring that workers and farmers, increase incomes, making sure that they can, they're more resilient to shocks, to bounce back quicker, etc.
Time.
Okay. Can I just say that if we thought more about this in an integrated way, including the people dimension, I think we would have seen less of a backlash on kind of climate action that has stymied what we've been doing over the last couple of decades.
Great. Thank you all so much. So at this stage, I would like to invite Magnus back to the stage, and also Sibel K-Rush, who is a Knowledge Director at the Global Resilience Partnership and a researcher on socio-ecological resilience at the Stockholm Resilience Centre. So these are our scientific experts who are going to be here while the kind of private sector representatives discuss. The next stage involves, yes, interesting setup. Our next stage involves our lovely audience. So I would like to invite everyone, if you are not already and if you are able to, could everyone please stand up? I'm not going to make you pretend to be a tree or anything like that, don't worry. Okay. Remain standing if climate risk is already discussed at the board or executive level in your organisation. That's good. Remain standing if climate risk has influenced a major investment, operational or strategic decision in the last 2 years. Okay. Remain standing if your organisation can demonstrate how those decisions reduce long-term vulnerability, not just short-term risk. Okay. Remain standing if your organisation explicitly considers the resilience of communities, workers, or ecosystems that your business depends on when making decisions. This is going pretty well. And remain standing if your organisation can quantify the value of those wider resilience benefits when it allocates capital. Well done, guys. Okay, thank you. Any surprises there? Anything interesting? Sibel, would you like to kick off?
No, I think that this is, it probably, or I mean, I would say that it was probably overly, surprisingly positive, I think, like in at least in the beginning, but then it's interesting also how difficult it is then to quantify these things long term.
Yeah. Okay, and we are now going to move on to a kind of slightly less formal and definitely less demanding of the audience panel discussion. Before we do, I just wanted to hand over to our private sector representatives who now feel even further away. Any surprises there? Where would you have sat down at that point? Francis?
I wonder how many businesses we've got in the audience, because I think they seem to perhaps be doing a little bit better than most of the private sector.
It actually surprised me, the board question, because in my CSO circles, I'm often hearing a frustration amongst my peers saying, this discussion isn't yet in our board. Yes, risk, but the resilience side isn't actually a topic. And the other thought I have is, Kitty, you are right on it, because everyone sat down when they said, yes, but no data. Don't have the data to quantify. So your data challenge is a really important one.
Yeah, great. Okay, and obviously we are here during London Climate Action Week. There may have been a little bit of confirmation bias. Everyone is at a resilience event, but by the by, as I said in my kind of opening remarks, we are also seeing huge kind of climate policy rollbacks and a much less certain political environment in certain markets, not everywhere. I wanted to ask Natalie, is that making resilience more important because companies can no longer kind of assume that policy will come in and bring everyone along with them? If government action is kind of less reliable and less certain, does business self-preservation become a stronger driver of resilience?
Yes, I think that at least for our company, we were of course, we are compliant. This is the least obligation, but we are very often ahead of that in many different ways. So first of all, because we are global, but with just one global standard. So this is important. So, for instance, in quality or in, I would say, human, living wages and so on. So there is just one global standard. And very often, because we have a big weight in Europe, that regulation and obligation can be very high in Europe. But then we are considering that the same, I would say, key drivers should be applied also in other places. And it's true that I would say in the last years, certainly the resilience of the business itself versus the climate crisis, first of all, and mostly the water crisis became really top of the agenda. And why? Because we are a food company again, so which means that most of our business depends on agriculture. So we are packaging the things and transforming them, but everything comes from agriculture at the very beginning. And we faced in different parts of the world very severe heat because of the changes. So for instance, I was living during almost 5 years in Morocco. We were having year after year the, I would say, exceptional drought, except that it was 5 years on the row. For that, you had a massive impact on communities, especially smallholder farmers. At one point in time, they decided that it's better to kill the cows and to, change lives, So where you see that type of things, of course, you understand that now it's your business which is at risk. And in many other places, maybe a bit less dramatic, we could see, for instance, reduction in yield just because of heat, for instance, or just because of some changes on a variety of climate. So we could see actual impact indeed, So from that point, of course, everybody has to understand, is it just an exceptional event or is it becoming a system which is coming, we have to go into phase? And we conducted a massive risk analysis with, I would say, science-based, with some experts on modeling, indeed, throughout entire supply chain, all the climate risk and the water risk we might face, and even also the affected communities risk that would be involved in it. So this is because we sit in France and we were the lucky one to apply the CSRD, the famous disclosure thing, maybe ahead of the pack. But at least that was, I think the good news is that we could conduct and fund a very massive science-based risk analysis. And based on that, indeed, we impacted the procurement, first of all, and the operations strategy. Yeah. So indeed, it's something very real and tangible now.
Yeah, okay, that's great to hear. Malin, would you want to add anything there? I think Sweden is not, I mean, what I hear from Swedish businesses is that the rollback has been not as severe as in lots of other markets, but how are you kind of addressing, obviously, a global presence?
I think it's, does it work? Yeah. Well, I mean, as mentioned before, IKEA has been working with sustainability since before the term was invented. I really think that is a big strength. So it's really ingrained in our values, and we've always had a long-term perspective, and we're quite an entrepreneurial company as well. So to some extent, I would say that our practices have always been very much bottom-up, and we see examples of that for what I mentioned in our cotton production, for example, and this long-standing relationship with WWF, where we have, together with local communities, engaged in how we can test and pilot, but improve regenerative cotton production, and then build on those learnings and scale it up. But of course, IKEA is all about scale and all about affordability, and increase prices, volatility, difficult to sort of operate the global supply chain, impacts costs a lot. So for us, it's very much about securing stability and scale, and these small pilots need to be, in the end, very practical and scalable. And I don't think we see any other way forward than securing resilience of our main materials, wood, cotton, but in a way that secures the affordable LCAW home furnishing range and food as well going forward. So we need policy. It should be harmonized, it should be stable, predictable, and but the movement is already there, and the business case, you could say, which also I think has been a word used a lot here, is there as well.
Yeah, okay. Protect the meatballs. Thank you. And Marissa, you know, we've talked a lot in general kind of these circles about that companies need to be resilient to remain investable, and they need to be able to demonstrate that resilience. From where you sit at Standard Chartered, do you see investors actually rewarding that resilience yet through kind of cost of capital or valuations, or are companies still kind of being asked to absorb those costs themselves? Because that's what I hear a lot, you know, the first mover advantage isn't really there in some markets.
As ever, you can imagine, it's quite a mixed answer, and it's very situation specific. But I can tell you, as a company biased to lend, if you think about this whole concept of resiliency, meaning that there's going to be less business interruption, almost by definition, if you're acting and doing something to make yourself more resilient, if you're adapting, then you're going to be a better underlying credit for me to lend to. So I would just put that out as a theoretical matter, that if you're not taking action, there will come a day when the equation is you won't have access to capital because you will be viewed to be so at risk that any lender or insurer is going to struggle to fund you. Where we do see probably the biggest, and so I would say the large corporations are moving. I mean, we're hearing it from leaders like these two wonderful panelists here, but I'm also seeing fascinating things happen. If I can take you really quickly to places that aren't so obvious. In the Gulf of Mexico with an energy project, I was just down visiting a multi-billion-dollar project that is effectively, you know, most of Louisiana and Texas, where a lot of energy infrastructure is being built, is below the water table. Now, this billion-dollar infra project has a gigantic wall, about half of the size of the height of this building, built around it. This huge, huge wall. And you ask, what's that about? And they will tell you that code tells them they have to build to a 100-year storm. And yet, they're seeing a 100-year storm every 6 months. I'm being a little bit aggressive there, but they're saying I'm building to the 500-year storm. That is an absolute definition. This is at an enormous cost because they're seeing it and they're getting ahead of it. And of course, then as a financier or lender, that is music to someone's ears. And to Kitty's point about recognition about communities, in some of these areas, you know, these very small towns, and small would be, you know, 5,000, 10,000 people. With each successive major weather storm, those people they cannot live. So the hollowing out of those areas is shocking. I mean, you know, the schools have closed, the fire departments have closed, et cetera. And the only way that these infrastructure companies can get access is to migrate people in to pay for them, so they actually have workers in their facilities. That is, you know, conceptually, that linkage has not 100% yet been drawn. So I think that's an area where we need to figure that out, and it can't be the purview of only big companies paying for it. And then to that same point, we are a supply chain bank, a trade finance bank. That's our heritage. When we get to the very, very end of the supply chain is where we have the biggest problem. Small, medium enterprises at the very, very frontier markets that are producing many of the goods and services we want. When we say to them, you need to do these things to make yourself more resilient, you know, they're on such thin margins, they say, who's going to pay for it? We need to figure out a systemic way to help fund that. It cannot be on their shoulders. It's not going to work.
Yeah, thank you. And Francis, from the kind of the social sustainability perspective, are these kind of similar issues that you see with these, like, right at the bottom of the supply chain? Like, what does that look like for you?
No, I mean, so what I would say in terms of kind of the value for Tetra Pak here and how we kind of distinguish ourselves is very similar to what was being said on the investment side, but for customers, right? Because so many of these, whether it's a social or environmental or climate kind of impact upstream is going to have an effect downstream very, very quickly. So, you know, where we can improve resilience and make sure that we reduce kind of business discontinuity, we're going to be a more trusted and reliable partner for our customers. They're also requiring it of us, right? We're seeing more and more from our you know, bit larger customers that they want us to undertake human rights and environmental due diligence across the value chain, and that is not just a supplier code requirement; it's actually built into contracts. So we're delivering on what they're requiring, and of course that is also partly driven by regulation, right? And you know that if you look at some of the, not just the kind of the due diligence legislation like the CS3D, etc., but some of the import bans that you see, the EU forced labour regulation, EUDR, etc., like dealing with these issues across your value chain is actually a question of market access. So you know these things do perhaps over the long term, it takes a while, but they come back and produce value for our customers as well.
Yeah, we at Sustainable Views, we actually published a piece recently about forced labour actions from the US Trade Representative. It seems to be quite a bipartisan concern, you know, where in one area they're kind of paying companies billions to close down wind farms. They definitely do still care about kind of forced labour. So yes, absolutely, risks everywhere. And from the kind of corporate perspective, you know, what Marissa was saying about you know, maybe not every investor or financier is recognizing the benefits of resilience right now, but from the corporate side, kind of securing investment, do you see the investors that you speak to, is there kind of the expectation of resilience measures? Is there pressure from investors? And open it up to anyone.
We're privately owned.
One thing we are starting to see for asset allocators, them creating funds, adaptation and resilience funds. And their thesis is, and I always say anything born out of necessity creates value. This is necessary. This isn't a nice to have this over time. And that is very attractive, I think, now to the investment community. They're starting to see this and saying, wow, if I start investing in either those companies and businesses that are responding, or actually think about the enormous and almost infinite market for goods and services that are going to be associated with adaptation and resilience. I just say, just pick one industry. I love the built environment, right? We're going to have to build completely differently with different products. Investing in those products, they will have an infinite addressable market. They're not a product looking for a home. So think about that from an investment proposition standpoint. I think that's starting to filter through the investment world, and I'm getting excited about that.
So maybe it's not a direct answer, to be fair, on the question, but it's about how to finance the resilience itself. Because there might be some opportunity in some tech and so on, but the reality is that, let's take agriculture, we need to finance the resilience. And it means to change practices, to, for instance, implement regenerative agriculture. We are very much involved in that. Or to, I would say, yes, generate, you know, more revenue for the farmers so that they can be more resilient in facing the shocks. And for all of that, we need funding. So some of the funding we can do by ourselves, you know, and we do have plans. For instance, I was taking Morocco. We created a Libladi plan where we address thousands of farmers, and we teach them, well, we train them on how to change practices so that their revenue can improve and the system can work with some, I would say, kind of grants that we provide on top. But honestly, we also need some other instruments for that. And I want to quote that also carbon credit can sometimes be a very valid source of revenue to finance the transition. So I know that sometimes it's accused of greenwashing, but the reality is that it can also be an instrument for that. And I think we need to promote, of course, with high integrity, that type of things. We experienced that through an investment fund where we participate, because when you scale up the idea of financing the resilience, Of course, you need the coalition. So, for instance, we have the fund Livelihood, where we are more than 10 different corporate investing in it. And those ones are based on the carbon credit that will finance the whole system, helping the communities to be more resilient facing the shock. For instance, in let's take Sumatra in Indonesia, where there is quite a case. And those things can be financed also through that. But we need more and more creativity and instruments for that, because indeed, there is a big case in the transition and a risk associated to changing for something to face and to create the resilience. So this is more, I would say, a call for, yes, we need also those, I would say, movement to find the investment for that.
Yeah. Thank you. Magnus and Sibel, I wanted to come to you kind of based on what you've heard so far, and maybe sticking with the kind of financial markets and investment space. I mean, Magnus, your opening remarks were pretty sobering. Do you get the sense that markets are kind of accurately pricing in exactly what you were talking about? What's going on either?
Okay. Thank you. Well, sorry for being so sober, but I'm a very positive person by nature, so I'm sort of just giving the picture here of the new reality, and I think there's so many exciting things happening, and I'm so positive to hear about all your comments. To me, it's really about. It's not only investing in business, to be honest. To me, it's all about investing in the biosphere, right? Because a dead planet is really bad for business. I think we no one can deny that. And also because if the biosphere will fail on us, that will also lead to, stranded resources, stranded assets, and all that. I think that. I think there's a lot being done, but I also see that there's a lot of room in, I don't know how to frame this, so this is just from the top of my head right now, but investing in the resilience corridor, to speak, to expand the resilience corridor once again. And in this case, what I think is really important when we talk about coping and adaptation is really that just a bit of a caution here, because I think that adapting can also be a way of continuing on a path that we don't want to continue on, right? So it's about finding. We need to adapt for sure. I'm not arguing against that, but at the same time, we also need to think about transformation. So how can we escape the current trajectory? So I think that would be one of my key points.
Yeah, I can just build on what you're saying, because actually I wanted to talk a bit about transformation, and especially I heard also from the challenges that you were saying at the beginning with the, with the sort of like a very unstable political landscape right now. That also means that, it's very hard to predict, where will the political support go and policy support go for sort of like doing the changes that are needed. And it is true that sort of like, so what Magnus described this morning with this new risk landscape, we can't just keep doing things as we have been doing, right? So like, events that, as you mentioned, that they were like, it was 1 in 100 years. Well, now it's not 1 in 100 years anymore. They are happening, with more and more, they are becoming more and more frequent, and also happening with a level of magnitude and intensity that has been, escalating really quickly. And so we do need to sort of like, fundamentally, some things we can preserve and we can keep doing what we're doing, but there are parts of our businesses or sort of like of the systems that we are operating with that we actually need to fundamentally transform. But I think it's important because it's, when we're talking about transformation, then sort of like innovation is key, right? So sort of like we need to test, we need to try new things, and these things are not just about technology. They are also about new ways of doing, new ways of organizing, new ways of thinking, new streams of knowledge. So, it's many innovation. It's not just about technology. I want to be very clear about that. So it's also about social innovation. It's about other forms of innovation. But for doing that, we do need sort of like a safe space to try and error and a safe space to fail. And that's where I think that sort of like, policy has a fundamental role of creating those safe spaces where people can actually dare to do something differently, because if they do fail, or if there will be a cost, they know that they are protected. And this goes from like, very individual level as sort of like, one farmer trying to do something different in their farm to sort of like, small businesses, bigger businesses. So it goes through all levels, right? To also like different sort of like policy scales, like from a city, a municipality, etc. So I think like, when we're talking about resilience investment, it's really key, the investment in sort of like, how can we create spaces for that, for testing those innovations, for those innovations to sort of like to develop and to evolve, because they will be sort of the sources of the new pathways. They will be the sources of the transformations that we want to see. So regulations, yes, they are needed to stop the bad trends, but then you also need the incentives to actually like do the things that will create the new change.
Great, thank you. So we are getting closer to the end now. I did just want to ask, when I kind of first came up here, I mentioned that resilience seems to be like the name of the game this week. Do you think that there's a danger, and I'll open this up to any of the panelists, do you think there is a danger that resilience just becomes another one of those kinds of buzzwords that people throw around that maybe sounds good to investors, but maybe isn't kind of deeply understood? Anyone want to take that? You're nodding aggressively.
Well, I think for IKEA, we've always tried to keep a very simple, easy to understand language, and I think people are almost proud of not speaking Swinglish almost internally. So I think I do see a bit of resistance. I mean, for sure, resilience is something that we talk about and that we take strong action on, and is integrated and part of our strategy. At the same time, I think it is important that we continuously bring it to life through concrete examples on what we mean, and make it very implementable and actionable to people who are supposed to work with this. And I think that's very important. So striking a good balance between bringing in science, making sure we don't oversimplify, but at the same time translate it into something that's actually actionable.
I would also argue that in order, certainly from the capital markets point of view, you do need common definitions. So unless you have a term of art that is adopted by the markets, very, very hard to attract capital and get it to scale. So, we don't want this to be a buzzword. We want it to be something that people can relate to. So one of the projects that we worked on was actually to try to create a common definition of adaptation and resilience, and we worked with KPMG and UN and World Economic Forum and 27 financial institutions on a paper that was the guide to adaptation and resilience. But it wasn't just about the definition. It was trying to identify 100 use cases just to light a spark, to say this is what we mean, but also, to Magnus's point, identifying places where you would have maladaption. So this lock-in concept, instead of getting at root cause, what is the problem, so we don't lock in and keep doing the same thing in the name of, extending the life of something that's not great, just so that we can beat, the effect of climate change. So these are complex subjects, but I think the more we can simplify, but the more we can create that common language, we're going to do ourselves a good service.
So, yes. So I think it's a good thing that we have a buzzword, to be provocative. So I think sustainability and just, I would say, loving the world and the planet, I think this is over, certainly. So I think we need to appreciate that there is a word which can make the bridge between, this long-term thing and the business also. So why not this resilience topic? Because it's pretty much, I would say, ringing a bell to a lot of the corporate. But of course, there is a need for making sure that it's the appropriate one, which is not only maladaptation, but also transformation, in deep and transformation. But indeed, I think we should celebrate that there is something where everybody can relate to, and now it's up to us to dig into that and to make it tangible and move it in the right direction.
Yeah, thank you. And Francis?
Thanks. I actually wanted to comment on the point on transformation and innovation, so separate to this discussion. So it's just a kind of a plea not to forget the social in those transformations and innovations as well, really, and that will go for transitioning away from non-renewable materials and sourcing locations and the impacts on people and job loss, etc., that could potentially create a whole host of new problems, but also thinking about renewable materials, etc. And maybe that's going into biorenewable materials and agricultural supply chains again, and then having to heighten your kind of human rights due diligence on that side as well. So just a plea to integrate that at every stage.
Totally. Sibel, do you want to wrap things up?
Yeah, so just a very short comment on that, but on sort of like transformative processes. A colleague of ours at the Stockholm Resilience Center, he often says that sort of like transformations are really both about being a midwife, like helping the new things, born, and, work at the asylum. So like helping the things that are actually being phasing out, and with all the social consequences that actually come to it, because there will always be people that will lose with the changes that we're trying to do. So that's really part of the resilience work, is to have that social responsibility for everything that is being left behind. And I mean, I don't know if Magnus agrees with me about the buzzword question, but like, yes, resilience is becoming a buzzword. It has been a long time, and it's confusing. But at the same time, words matter when they are at the table. So it is good to actually have resilience at the table. And I think that for us, it's also that in the end of the day, resilience is about accepting change and accepting that we can live and develop with change. So we don't need to be rigid. We can actually have that flexibility, have that sort of like resilience that, whatever shocks we will face, we will actually be able to adapt and to transform and to continue to develop in the face of that change. Any final words?
Final, super short. No, but I really like what you both were talking about when it comes to some of the social aspects, right? Because it will. I'm painting this sort of gloom picture for sure, but that's also part of putting some of our perceptions and ideas in hospice in a way. Well, I mean, seriously, you have to say goodbye to a few things to start to realize the new reality and move into that new space with dignity. Right, and honor to a large extent. So that's an important point. The second one is about the buzzword. I think it is becoming a buzzword, and of course it depends on how sincere you are about using it. You can always use it in different ways, right? But I actually think that if tension can actually be good in many ways, because it really has you, it must force you to sharpen your argument, provide examples, be very clear to people in different communities. But it's about the fundamentals that are important. It's not about bouncing back, it's about coping, adapting, and transforming all together, right? Yeah, final words.
And next time we will be together and not separated, because that is part of the change.
Okay, that is all we have time for this segment. So thank you so much to our panel. Can we give them a round of applause? Okay, I would now, there's not too much longer keeping you between you and your coffee. I would now like to invite Jenny Dodson, Senior Policy Director at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and Julia Martins, Private Sector Partnerships Lead at GRP.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think this is a great follow-up from the discussion that we just heard there, because I'm going to, it's brilliant to see so many of our members sharing great stories and examples of the work they're doing. But I want to back that up with further evidence from a broader breadth of businesses. And it's delightful to be here today with the Global Resilience Partnership. I was last with them launching the Business Resilience Awards at COP30. Some people talked about the space we were in the blue zone as Mordor. It was very hot, very humid, very dark, but we had an amazing moment and really inspiring examples. I didn't think we would have Mordor here in London, but there you go. I think we're also going to have lots of inspiration as well. So what we launched yesterday, the Business Breakthrough Barometer 2026. This is an annual publication we do that really brings the perspective from business on the pace of the climate transition, the risks, the opportunities, the challenges, and what is needed to move faster. And this is 500 business leaders from around the world surveyed, 70 in-depth interviews across lots of different value chains and sectors. And I think just to put a point on what you heard there and kind of expand that out and give you some of the data points. So I think one really positive message is that 92% say that they see their sustainability strategy as a source of competitive advantage over the next decade. But what's coming through is that is the key things around that, and what's driving that is compliance is a key thing. Growth opportunity is a key thing, but super interesting this year, resilience was one of the top things that was coming out across the businesses. 50% of businesses said that was a key driver of their strategy. But I think what's really interesting, I think, for what you've heard is that driver of resilience is really expanding. So climate risk is absolutely there. 47% of businesses said they'd seen increased costs over the past year from physical climate impacts. So supply chain shocks, insurance cost increases, disruption to infrastructure that are absolutely there and more expected to increase next year. But it's a lot broader than that as well. It's about energy security, it's resource security, it's thinking through resilience of the people that businesses are working through, and a number of different solutions are coming through then as areas that businesses are investing in that I think you heard here today. So circularity came up a lot more in terms of a priority for businesses in terms of thinking about resilience and security going forward. Regenerative agriculture, we heard there, in terms of both the opportunity for mitigation, the opportunity for resilience against climate impacts, but also for farmers, as a route for farmers to see an opportunity for their future generations to pass on farms. So I think we've got a lot of examples there. I think a real concerning point is around the concerns around disorderly transition. So 68% of businesses said they think that disorderly transition is now more likely. 98% of businesses said they think that's a risk to their business. 40% a critical risk. Only 15% feel fully prepared. And we were launching this yesterday, and essentially the politicians said it's going to be disorderly, right? So I think that's a real aspect to think about. I think there's a real need for this push on the policy opportunities and the policy options that support this resilience and the business growth opportunities, and they are specific by solution. But for the politicians, they need stories, and they need success stories and impact stories. I think we've got some additional slides, have we? Do we have some additional slides? Okay, so yeah, you can download the barometer, get those stats, utilize them. But the stories are really critically important to show to policymakers, to other businesses about what is possible, and really important that this is, this is also data driven. It shows the real demonstration of what's possible, but also the business benefits of that, the social benefits of that, the economic opportunities of that as well. So we were really delighted, WBCSD, to deliver the first Climate Resilience Awards for Business last year, and really about the shift from, talking about what's needed to showing what's possible and showing implementation on the ground. There's four different areas of focus for this around infrastructure, around agriculture and food systems, water stewardship, and protecting and putting people first. At the first Climate Resilience Awards for Business that we announced last year at COP30, we saw a fantastic response rate. So 152 case studies submitted, a huge number from SMEs, which is fantastic to see. And I think that the impact numbers are really brilliant. So 5 million people supported by this number of examples, $33 million mobilized investment in climate resilience. And you know, we're hearing a lot from governments. I see Samad there at the back. He will launch lots of stories for COP31. You know, there is a desire to move towards implementation. So this is a real opportunity to get those stories out there, to elevate resilience not just as a buzzword, which I think is important, right, but as something that is concrete and actionable and can be scaled. And we, WBCSD and others, can then take those forward and elevate those and show to governments what we can do to accelerate and scale them. Delighted to hand over to Julie now to share a little bit more about the awards from last year.
Thank you, Jenny. And I'll just add two things that I think are worth naming, also because they help us shape how we're thinking about the awards now in year two. The first thing that stood out from last year was really the breadth, and you mentioned the amazing number of applications we had, and especially the number of applications from SMEs, and the strength of the applications from SMEs that really stood out. And in the panel just now, we heard, you know, the importance also of, you know, the resilience of the smallholder farmers, of the, you know, the SMEs, the innovators. So that was something that was really interesting for us to see in the applications. One of the winners from last year actually was Build Up Nepal, and they are an innovative approach to building earthquake-resistant homes. They also won a grant from GIP, from one of our innovation challenges, and you'll be hearing from them, if you're here this afternoon, you'll be hearing from them at the Investor Forum. So the second thing that I will say was that how we're sharpening the focus for year two for the selection. So we heard here also in the panel how GIP and Stockholm Resilience Center define resilience and pushing a bit for a little bit more rigor in that definition. So we talk about this capacity to cope, adapt, and transform. And we saw also in the 2025 cohort that really strong applications, they had this stronger definition of resilience as well, and they had examples of that stronger framing. We heard from two finalists as well from last year in the panel just now that includes Standard Chartered and Danone were finalists from last year. So that reframing of resilience that the panel just discussed is also something that we're being more intentional about in year two. So applications are open. I think we can put the QR code. The QR code is on the screen, and we look forward to hearing from all of you. Back to you, Jenny.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So yes, the official launch of the second edition of the Climate Resilience Awards for Business. We are expecting more than 150 case studies this year. I think hopefully all of you will contribute to this. I think also share it with other people that you're aware of. I think the more that we can show the real examples of success, the real impacts on the ground, the benefits to business, but also the benefits to your supply chain, the benefits to the people that you're working with, the more impactful that this will be, and really turn this from, as we said, you know, a buzzword to examples of action that can be scaled. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny and Julia. We are nearly coming to the end. I would just like to finally introduce Samed Aribas, who is UN Climate Change High-Level Champion for the Turkish COP31 presidency, for some closing remarks.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you today. We are very excited. We will host COP31 in Antalya, 9 to 20 November. Also, thank you to Global Resilience Partnership, the Atlantic Council, and all partners for bringing us together. As Turkey prepares to host COP31, I would like to focus on the one word, implementation. Implementation is very important words for ourselves, for our future. For me, climate action is not only about global targets and negotiations. It is about everyday life. It is about our families, our schools, and our communities. Also, families are not thinking about the abstract targets. They are thinking about clean air. They want to healthy food. They want to safe and thriving communities where their children can grow and succeed. That is why I support the Global Climate Action Agenda. It connects high-level promises to real people. It brings together mayors, small business, civil society, and local leaders who work every day to turn ambition into action and solution into impact. Many of priorities shaping the road to COP31 are deeply connected to people: zero waste and circularity, youth and education, food security and health. These are not separate agenda. They are part of the same path toward a more resilient and net zero future. The more efficiency we use resource, the more resilience we became. That is why zero waste matters. When we waste food, water, energy, and materials, we increase cost, deepen vulnerables, and miss opportunities to strengthen communities. When we prevent waste, we reduce emission, improve resource efficiency, and create more resilient societies. As high-level climate champion for COP31, I want to focus heavily on what unlock progress. By removing barriers on the ground, we can accelerate innovation, encourage responsible consumption, support business, and protect livelihoods. As we head to COP31, let's keep our focus on solutions that deliver visible benefit to people's daily life. We need to truly global effort. We need to everyone to take responsibility for their communities. I believe if we can work together for our future, for better world, we can create very strong communities. I would like to special thanks to our listeners for the having us today. Thank you so much. See you in Antalya.
Okay, thank you so much. So that concludes this morning's sessions.